The rain had just started to fall when the private jet's door opened, tapping softly against the polished metal stairs like nervous fingers. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But something about that quiet moment felt wrong in a way you couldn't name yet. Before we begin, real quick, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? Morning, late night, somewhere in between? Keep that in mind as you listen, because this story might hit differently depending on the hour. A small boy stepped onto the jet. He couldn't have been more than 10, maybe 11 at most. He wore a faded navy hoodie that was a size too big, sleeves pulled down over his hands. His sneakers were clean but worn thin at the edges, the kind of shoes that had been tied and retied by someone who didn't want to waste money replacing them too soon. Slung over his shoulder was a soft canvas backpack, light enough that it barely seemed to pull him backward. His name was Elijah Brooks, and the first thing he did when he entered the cabin was stop. Not because anyone told him to, not because he was confused, but because he didn't want to be in the way. Elijah stood just inside the doorway, eyes scanning the cabin the way kids do when they're trying to figure out the rules without asking. Cream-colored leather seats, soft amber lighting. Everything smelled faintly like citrus and something expensive he couldn't place. He swallowed, tightened his grip on the strap of his bag, and took one careful step forward. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, even though no one had spoken to him yet. That was the thing about Elijah. He apologized before the world had the chance to accuse him. He'd practiced this in his head. Sit down, don't touch anything, don't make noise, don't cough too much, just get through the flight. That was all. 6 hours in the air, 6 hours of being invisible. He followed the aisle toward the front, counting his steps, until he reached the seat listed on the boarding card folded neatly in his pocket. The seat looked different from the others. Wider, positioned just right. The kind of seat adults whispered about without saying why. Elijah hesitated. He checked the card again. Same number, same row. He climbed in carefully, like the seat might reject him if he moved too fast. He placed his backpack at his feet, sat upright and folded his hands in his lap. His breathing was shallow, controlled. Inside the pocket of his hoodie, his fingers brushed against a small plastic inhaler just to make sure it was still there. Across the cabin, a flight attendant paused. Her name tag read Vanessa Reed. She had been smiling just moments ago, laughing softly with another crew member near the galley. But when her eyes landed on Elijah, the smile froze. Not vanished. Froze, like someone hitting pause instead of stop. She looked at the boy. Then she looked at the seat. Then back at the boy. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Elijah noticed. Of course he did. Kids like him always noticed. He lowered his gaze, shoulders curling inward, already bracing for the correction he felt coming. He told himself to stay calm. Grown-ups had reasons. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe he was wrong. If he was wrong, he'd move. He always moved. Vanessa took a step forward. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, before anyone raised their voice or pointed a finger, something shifted in the air. The kind of shift you only recognize later, when you're telling the story back, and realize this was the exact second everything started going wrong. This wasn't just another flight. This was one of those revenge stories where the quietest person in the room ends up carrying the most weight. And Elijah Brooks, sitting perfectly still in a seat he didn't think he deserved, had no idea how close the storm really was. Vanessa Reed didn't rush over. She didn't snap her fingers or raise her voice like she owned the cabin. She did something worse. She walked slowly, with that polished, practiced calm you only see in people who know exactly how much power they have, and how little they need to show to make someone feel small. Her heels made soft clicks on the aisle floor. Each one landed like punctuation. Elijah watched her approach without really looking at her. His eyes stayed on the seam of the seat in front of him, like if he stared hard enough, he could disappear into it. Vanessa stopped beside his row and let the silence stretch. Not long, but long enough for Elijah to feel it in his throat. Then she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile adults use when they're about to correct a child in public but want to pretend they're being kind. "Hey there," she said. voice light and sweet. "Hi." Elijah lifted his eyes just enough to meet hers. "Hi, ma'am." He said ma'am the way he'd been taught. Respectful, careful, no attitude. Vanessa's gaze flicked down. Hoodie, sneakers, the canvas backpack tucked close like a shield, then back up to his face. "Are you traveling alone today?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said. I have paperwork." He didn't know why he blurted that out. It just slipped out of him, like his brain was trying to prove he belonged. Vanessa's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Mm-hmm," she hummed, like she'd already decided what his answer meant. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice in a way that felt private even though it wasn't. The cabin was quiet, but not empty. There were people farther back, someone in a tailored jacket flipping through a magazine, another passenger wearing headphones, an assistant type with a laptop open on the table. Vanessa knew they could hear. Elijah knew they could hear. "So," Vanessa said softly, this is a special seat." Elijah's stomach tightened. I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I can move if it's wrong. My card says." Vanessa held up one finger, gentle like she was calming him down. But that finger wasn't kindness. It was control. No, she said. "Don't panic. I'm just letting you know, okay?" Elijah nodded, fast, too fast. Vanessa straightened and glanced toward the front of the cabin like she was checking for someone important. "This area is typically reserved for our top-level guests," she continued. "People who, charter, executive clients, donors, that sort of thing." Elijah blinked. He didn't fully understand, but he understood enough. Important people, not him. His cheeks warmed. He could feel his ears burning. I'm supposed to be here," he said quietly, and even he could hear how uncertain it sounded. Vanessa's smile widened by a fraction, like she'd just caught him admitting something. "Sweetie," she said, still soft, "I'm sure you believe that." The word believe hit harder than if she'd called him a liar. Elijah swallowed and reached into his hoodie pocket, fingers brushing the folded boarding card. He wanted to show it, but his hands were shaking, and the fear of doing it wrong stopped him. Vanessa noticed the movement and gently placed her hand on the armrest, blocking him like a gate. "No need to dig through your things," she said, still smiling. "Let me handle it." She turned her head slightly and called toward the galley, her tone shifting into a bright professional sing-song. "Can someone confirm the manifest for me?" A crew member in the back glanced up but didn't answer right away. Vanessa looked back at Elijah and her voice dropped again. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, like she was offering him a solution to a problem he'd caused. "We're going to move you to a different seat, just for takeoff." Elijah's eyes widened. "But it's policy," she cut in smoothly, still sweet. "And it'll be more comfortable for everyone. Elijah heard what she meant. Not for him, for them. He glanced down at his hands in his lap. His fingers were clenched so tight his knuckles were pale. He could feel the inhaler in his pocket again, and suddenly he worried about something else. Not the seat, not the embarrassment. What if he started coughing? What if he couldn't breathe? The last time he'd had a flare-up, the room had spun, and people had stared, and someone had yelled for a nurse, and Elijah had cried even though he didn't want to. He couldn't do that here. Not on a plane. Not in front of people like this. I can be quiet," he whispered, as if quietness was something he could trade for dignity. Vanessa's eyes softened in a way that looked convincing if you didn't know better. "Oh, honey, it's not about you being quiet. It's about presentation." She said it like presentation was a rule of nature. Elijah felt his throat tighten, but he forced air into his lungs slowly. He didn't want her to see him panic. He didn't want anyone to see him panic. Vanessa glanced down the aisle again, as if someone might appear any second and catch him in the wrong place. Then she leaned closer, close enough that Elijah could smell her perfume, clean and sharp. and her voice turned colder under the sweetness. "Listen," she murmured. "I'm trying to help you, but if you make this difficult, it becomes a security issue, and you don't want that. Trust me." Elijah's heart thudded. Security issue. He pictured men in uniforms, hands on his arms, everyone watching, his mom's voice in his head. "Stay polite. Don't argue. Don't give them a reason." He nodded once. Vanessa straightened like she'd won a small, silent game. "Good choice," she said brightly, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Let's get you settled." Elijah slid to the edge of the seat, moving carefully, trying not to brush the leather too hard like it might stain from his touch. He reached for his backpack, pulling it close, and stood in the aisle. He looked down at the seat one last time. It was just a seat. But the way Vanessa watched him, the way the air felt heavier, the way his own body folded inward as he stepped away, it felt like he was giving up something bigger than a place to sit. It felt like he was being taught in real time exactly where the world thought he belonged. Elijah followed Vanessa down the aisle, one step behind her, the way kids learn to walk when they don't want to be noticed. Each movement felt too loud. The soft scuff of his sneakers against the floor echoed in his head like he was doing something wrong just by existing. Vanessa stopped abruptly near the galley and turned so fast Elijah almost bumped into her. "Oh," she said lightly, as if surprised. "Hold on." She crouched and reached toward his hoodie pocket. Elijah flinched on instinct. "I just need to make sure you don't have anything that could roll away," she said, already slipping her fingers inside before he could respond. Her hand brushed the small plastic inhaler. For a split second, her eyes flicked to it. She knew what it was. Anyone would. And then, very deliberately, she pulled her hand back too quickly. The inhaler slipped from her fingers, bounced once on the floor, and skidded under the edge of a service cabinet. "Oh," Vanessa said again. The sound came out flat this time. Elijah's heart dropped into his stomach. My inhaler," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He knelt immediately, reaching under the cabinet with shaking fingers. Vanessa straightened instead of helping. "We can get that later," she said, already looking past him. "Let's focus on getting you settled first." Elijah's fingertips brushed cold metal, but the inhaler was just out of reach. He tried again, stretching farther, his chest tightening, not yet, but enough that he felt the warning flare like a distant alarm. "I need it," he said quietly, "just in case." Vanessa sighed, loud enough for others to hear. "Sweetheart," she said, "we're about to taxi. I can't have you crawling around on the floor right now." A man a few rows back glanced up from his phone. Another passenger leaned slightly into the aisle, curiosity flickering across their face. Elijah felt it instantly, the attention, the weight of eyes. He stood up, hands empty. Vanessa nodded, satisfied, and turned toward the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice suddenly professional and clear, "we're just handling a small seating adjustment. Thank you for your patience." Small. The word felt like a lie wrapped in velvet. She gestured toward the rear of the plane, past the leather seats, past the quiet lounge area, toward the narrower space near the crew section. "This way," she said to Elijah, not looking at him now. As they walked, Vanessa kept talking, not to him, about him. "We try to maintain a certain standard up here," she said casually, glancing toward a well-dressed couple near the front. "And sometimes we have to make quick decisions for the comfort of our guests." Guests. Plural. Elijah was apparently something else. A woman across the aisle frowned. "Is he okay?" she asked softly. Vanessa smiled at her without slowing down. "He's fine. Just a bit confused." Confused. Elijah's throat burned. He wanted to say he wasn't confused. He knew exactly what was happening. But the words stuck somewhere deep, tangled up with fear. They reached the jump seat near the galley, a narrow fold-down chair facing the wall. No window, no table, just a hard surface and a strap. Vanessa stopped and turned to face him again. "This will be better," she said. "Out of the way. Less stimulation." Elijah stared at the seat. It looked like it was meant for someone who wasn't supposed to be there long. Can I sit somewhere else? He asked. I don't feel so good. Vanessa's smile vanished. She straightened fully now, her body blocking his path back toward the cabin. I need you to listen to me, she said, low and firm. You were asked to move. You moved. Don't turn this into something it doesn't need to be. Elijah's breathing hitched. I'm not trying to… She cut him off, louder now. Sir, she said sharply, using the word like a warning. I need you to sit down, sir. The irony stung, but Elijah barely noticed. His chest felt tight now. Not a full attack, not yet, but close enough that his vision blurred at the edges. A man near the aisle muttered, It's just a kid. Vanessa turned toward him with a practiced laugh. Exactly, and that's why we're taking care of it. Taking care of it. Elijah sat. The jump seat creaked under his weight. He pulled the strap across his lap with trembling hands, struggling with the buckle until Vanessa leaned in and snapped it shut herself, harder than necessary. There, she said. All set. She stepped back and looked him over, assessing the damage, then reached up and yanked the heavy curtain closed. The fabric slid across with a harsh, final sound. The cabin disappeared. So did the light. Elijah sat alone in the dim galley space, the hum of the engines louder back here, vibrating through the metal wall in front of him. His knees nearly touched it. The air felt colder, thinner. He pressed his palms against his thighs and focused on breathing the way his doctor had taught him, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. His inhaler was still under the cabinet. He could see it now, just barely. A flash of white plastic in the shadows. He didn't reach for it, not because he didn't need it, but because he didn't want to give her another reason. On the other side of the curtain, Vanessa's voice floated back, bright and relaxed again. Thank you for your patience, she said to the cabin. Everything's taken care of. Elijah closed his eyes. For the first time since stepping onto the plane, he felt something heavier than fear settle in his chest. It wasn't panic. It was the quiet, crushing understanding that whatever he was in this world, whoever he was meant to be, it didn't matter here. Not right now. Not unless someone decided it did. The plane began to move. At first it was barely noticeable, just a low vibration traveling through the metal wall in front of Elijah's knees. Then came the deeper rumble, the kind you feel more than hear, as the jet slowly rolled away from the gate. Elijah stayed very still. The jump seat pressed hard against his back, unforgiving, designed for short moments, not for a child who didn't know how long he'd be left here. The strap cut lightly across his waist. The curtain behind him swayed once, then settled, sealing him off from the rest of the cabin like a door that hadn't been locked but might as well have been. He tried to breathe normally, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the nurse had taught him. But the air back here felt different. Colder, thinner. The engine noise was louder, a constant roar that made it hard to tell whether the tightness in his chest was real or just his fear catching up with him. He glanced down toward the floor. The inhaler was still there, just under the edge of the cabinet, close enough that if he leaned forward and stretched, he could probably reach it. He tested the idea in his head, imagining the movement, the sound it might make if he knocked something over. And then he imagined Vanessa pulling the curtain open again, imagined her face, the look she'd given him when he'd asked if he could sit somewhere else. Elijah pulled his hands back into his lap. He wasn't stupid. He knew his body. He knew the warning signs. This wasn't an emergency yet. It was just close, like standing near the edge of something and knowing one wrong step could tip you over. He focused on staying calm. The plane turned, aligning itself with the runway. The engines whined higher, building pressure. Elijah's heart started to race, but he forced his shoulders down, forced his jaw to unclench. You're okay, he told himself. You're okay. As the jet accelerated, the force pushed him back into the seat. His stomach fluttered, a strange mix of weightlessness and fear. He closed his eyes and counted silently, the way he always did. 1, 2, 3. The wheels lifted. For a brief second, there was a floating sensation like the world had dropped away beneath him. Then the climb steadied, and the pressure in his ears popped sharply. Elijah swallowed. When he opened his eyes again, nothing had changed. He was still alone, still facing a blank metal wall, still not supposed to exist where he was. The cabin noise beyond the curtain was faint now. Muffled laughter, the clink of glass, someone asking for a drink. Normal sounds, comfortable sounds, sounds from a place he'd been quietly removed from. Elijah shifted slightly, trying to ease the ache in his back. The seat didn't give. His fingers brushed against the edge of his backpack, which he'd wedged at his feet. He pulled it closer, resting his hand on the worn fabric like it was something alive, something familiar. Inside the bag was a folder. He knew exactly where it was. He'd checked before boarding, checked again in the car on the way to the airport. Thick paper, official seals. Words he didn't fully understand, but had been explained to him carefully, slowly, by people who spoke softly and never raised their voices around him. He wasn't supposed to take it out. He'd been told that very clearly. This flight mattered, not just because of where it was going, but because of how it was happening. "Just observe," the lawyer had said, crouching down to be at eye level with him. "You don't need to do anything. Just be yourself." Elijah hadn't known how to explain that being himself usually meant staying quiet and trying not to make anyone uncomfortable. He pressed his thumb against the zipper of the bag but didn't open it. Not yet. The plane leveled off, the engine noise smoothing into a steady hum. The seatbelt sign chimed softly somewhere beyond the curtain. Elijah loosened his grip on the strap across his waist but didn't unbuckle. He didn't want to give anyone a reason to come back here. He tilted his head slightly, resting it against the wall. The metal was cool against his temple. It grounded him. He thought about his mom, about the way she used to tell him to sit up straight, to look people in the eye, even when they made him feel small, about how she'd squeeze his hand twice whenever things got hard. A quiet signal that meant, "I see you." He squeezed his own hand now. Once. Twice. On the other side of the curtain, a voice rose in laughter. Vanessa's laugh. Easy, unbothered. Like nothing back here existed at all. Elijah stared at the wall in front of him, at the faint reflection of his own face in the polished metal of the cabinet. Small. Serious. Older than it should have been. Something shifted inside him then. Not anger. Not yet. Something steadier. He understood, in that moment, exactly what was happening. Not just to him, but around him. The seat, the curtain, the silence. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And for the first time since stepping onto the plane, Elijah stopped wondering whether he belonged. He already knew the answer. The question now was how long the world would take to catch up. Elijah had memorized the rule long before he understood why it existed. Don't tell anyone. It wasn't written like a threat. No raised voices, no stern warnings. Just a calm, careful sentence spoken in a quiet room that smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. Under no circumstances, the lawyer had said gently, do you identify yourself on this trip? Elijah remembered sitting across from him, feet dangling above the floor, nodding even though his stomach felt tight. He'd asked one question back then. Only one. What if someone's mean? The lawyer had paused. Not long. Just long enough to choose his words. Then we learned something important, he'd said. Now, sitting on the jump seat with the hum of the engines vibrating through his bones, Elijah finally understood what that meant. The plane cruised steadily. The initial climb long over. The rush of takeoff adrenaline had faded, replaced by something quieter and heavier. His breathing had settled, though the tightness in his chest still lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. He hadn't reached for the inhaler. Not yet. He focused on the wall in front of him instead, on the faint scratches in the metal, on the way his reflection wavered slightly when the plane shifted. It helped him stay present. It helped him stay small. Behind the curtain, life continued. A drink cart rolled by, the wheels clicking softly over the floor. Someone laughed again. Glass clinked. A voice asked about the weather in New York. Normal questions. Normal people. Elijah wondered what it would feel like to be normal. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the folder, just an inch. Not enough for anyone to see, just enough for him to feel the weight of it in his hands. The papers inside were thicker than normal documents, embossed seals, stiff edges. His name printed cleanly at the top of the first page, followed by words that still felt too big for him. Beneficiary, signatory, controlling interest. He didn't like those words. They felt sharp, heavy, like things that belonged to adults with loud voices and expensive suits. He slid the folder back into the bag and zipped it closed. "You're not here to use it," he reminded himself. "You're here to see." That was the rule. This flight wasn't just transportation. It was part of a larger decision, one that had nothing to do with comfort or convenience. The people who managed the foundation, the ones who spoke carefully around him, who always asked before touching his shoulder, had explained it in pieces. Culture matters. How people treat the weakest person in the room matters, especially when they think no one important is watching. Elijah shifted slightly in the seat, trying to ease the ache in his legs. The strap dug in, and he winced, then froze, worried someone might hear. He glanced toward the curtain. It stayed closed. Vanessa hadn't come back. That should have been a relief. Instead, it made his chest feel heavier. He realized something then, sitting there in the dim galley with the engine noise pressing in from all sides. If he spoke up now, if he said who he was, everything would stop. The curtain would open. Voices would change. Faces would rearrange themselves into something polite and careful and fake. Apologies would come quickly, too quickly. They would say it was a misunderstanding. They always did. And whatever had been revealed about the people on this plane would vanish, smoothed over by professionalism and smiles. Elijah didn't want that, not because he wanted revenge, not because he wanted to punish anyone, but because if he spoke now, the truth would never finish unfolding. A sudden jolt rocked the plane lightly, turbulence rippling through the cabin. Elijah's fingers tightened around the edge of his seat. His breathing sped up for a moment, and he pressed his lips together, forcing himself to slow it down again. In, out, in, out. He was okay. He was still okay. The lawyer's voice echoed in his head again, calm and steady. "You don't owe anyone an explanation. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to let the system reveal itself." Elijah swallowed. On the other side of the curtain, Vanessa's voice floated back again, closer this time. She was speaking to someone near the galley, her tone low but sharp. "I don't care," she said. "He shouldn't have been up there in the first place." There was a pause. "I made the right call," she continued. "I always do." Elijah closed his eyes. So, this was it. This was what they were learning. He thought about all the stories he'd heard, about adults in power, about kids who were told to move, to wait, to accept less and be grateful for it. Stories that didn't make the news, stories that didn't end with apologies. Stories like the ones people listened to late at night, searching for some proof that the world could still correct itself. The kind of revenge stories that weren't loud or violent, but slow and inevitable. Elijah didn't feel powerful sitting there. He felt small, tired, a little scared. But underneath all of that, something else was growing, something solid. He wasn't supposed to speak. He wasn't supposed to reveal anything. His job was simply to endure, and let the truth do the rest. The curtain opened again without warning. Elijah flinched at the sudden rush of light, his eyes blinking as Vanessa stepped into the narrow galley space. She didn't smile this time. She didn't pretend. Her face was flat, resolved. "There you are," she said, like she'd been looking for a misplaced bag, not a child. Elijah straightened instinctively, hands gripping the edge of the seat. His heart kicked harder in his chest, but he kept his breathing slow. He didn't speak. He had learned, very quickly, that silence was safer than the wrong words. Vanessa glanced down at the floor, noticed the inhaler still half hidden beneath the cabinet, and then looked back at him. "You really should have told someone about that," she said lightly. "I tried," Elijah said before he could stop himself. His voice came out thin, fragile. "It fell." Vanessa's lips pressed together. Not in guilt, in irritation. "Well," she replied, "we're past that now." She reached up and tugged the curtain wider, exposing the galley fully to the cabin beyond. Elijah felt the eyes before he saw them, curious, assessing, impatient. Vanessa turned just enough so her voice carried. "I just want to clarify," she said, addressing no one and everyone at once, "that this seating change was necessary, for safety, and for the comfort of our guests." Elijah felt heat crawl up his neck. Safety, comfort, words adults used when they wanted to sound reasonable. A man seated nearby frowned. "Is he okay back there?" he asked, not unkindly. Vanessa smiled again, quick and controlled. "He's fine. Kids just don't always understand boundaries." Elijah swallowed. His fingers curled tighter. Boundaries, as if he'd crossed one simply by sitting where he'd been told. Vanessa turned back to him, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Listen to me," she said. "I need you to stay put. No wandering, no touching things, and no more dramatics." Elijah's chest tightened at the word. He nodded once. "I wasn't," he started. Vanessa cut him off with a sharp look. "Do you know how this looks?" she murmured. "A kid wandering around a charter flight, making passengers uncomfortable?" She leaned closer, her tone dropping into something colder. "People notice things like that, and when people notice, they ask questions." Elijah stared at the floor. Questions were dangerous. Vanessa straightened and reached for the curtain again. But before closing it, she added, almost casually, "Oh, and just so you know, if you unbuckle without permission, that's a violation. I don't want to escalate this into a report." A report. Elijah felt the word land heavy in his stomach. "I won't," he whispered. Vanessa nodded, satisfied, and pulled the curtain shut with a firm yank. The fabric swayed, then went still. Elijah sat frozen, listening to his own heartbeat thunder in his ears. His breathing was faster now, not panicked, but strained, like he was running out of space. He pressed his palms against his thighs, grounding himself, counting silently again. 1, 2, 3. On the other side of the curtain, Vanessa's voice dropped into a hushed conversation with another crew member. "I don't care what the manifest says," she muttered. "Use your head, look at him." There was a pause. "Yes," she continued, sharper now. "Exactly. Image matters." Elijah closed his eyes. So that was it. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't policy. It was choice. She had seen him, assessed him, and decided he was expendable. His chest tightened further, a dull ache spreading outward. He shifted slightly, testing his breathing. It wasn't an attack yet, but it was closer than before. He glanced again at the inhaler under the cabinet. So close. But the memory of Vanessa's warning echoed louder. "Violation. Report. Escalate." Elijah forced his hands to stay still. He thought about the people who had explained this test to him, how they'd said some adults would fail loudly, others quietly. How they'd said the hardest part would be staying silent when every part of him wanted to speak. This was the hardest part, because now it wasn't just about being ignored. It was about being deliberately pushed down. Vanessa's laughter floated back again, lighter now, as if the problem had been handled and forgotten. Elijah sat in the dim galley, the hum of the engines vibrating through him, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Not fear, not anger, resolve. She thought she had control. She thought she'd closed the curtain on the situation. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that every word she'd spoken, every choice she'd made, was being added to something much larger than her. The system was watching, and it was still learning. The chime cut through the cabin without warning. It wasn't the soft call button sound passengers used. It was sharper, cleaner, the kind of tone that didn't ask for attention. It took it. Vanessa froze mid-step. She had been reaching for a bottle behind the galley counter, still riding the confidence of control, when the sound echoed again, followed by a low electronic beep from the intercom panel near the cockpit. For half a second, no one moved. Then the captain's voice came over the speakers, steady but noticeably tighter than before. "Cabin crew, stand by." Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. She glanced at the panel, then at the curtain that separated her from the jump seat. Her jaw tightened. "Excuse me," she muttered, already moving toward the cockpit. Elijah felt the shift before he understood it. The air changed. The noise in the cabin dipped, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. Even the engine hum seemed to recede into the background, like the plane itself was listening. The curtain stayed closed, but Elijah could hear everything now. Muffled voices. A pause. Then the sound of a handset being lifted. "Yes," the captain said. "This is the flight deck." There was another pause, longer this time. Elijah leaned his head lightly against the metal wall, eyes fixed on the seam where the cabinet met the floor. His breathing slowed without him trying. Something in his body recognized this moment, even if his mind didn't yet have words for it. On the other side of the curtain, Vanessa spoke quickly, her voice clipped and professional. "I handled it," she said. "It was a minor seating issue." The reply came through the speaker, distorted but unmistakably firm. "Who authorized the relocation of Elijah Brooks from his assigned seat?" The name landed like a weight dropped from height. Elijah Brooks. His full name. Not the kid. Not the passenger. Not the situation. His name. Elijah's fingers tightened around the edge of the seat. Vanessa didn't answer right away. "I'm asking again," the voice continued, calm but edged with something sharper. "Who authorized it?" Vanessa cleared her throat. "I did," she said. "Based on cabin discretion." There was a brief silence, the kind that stretched just long enough to make people uncomfortable. "On what grounds?" the voice asked. Vanessa shifted. "Safety, comfort of other guests, image." The word image hung in the air, naked now. Elijah closed his eyes. He could picture it perfectly, the raised eyebrow on the other end of the line, the pause as someone checked a screen, scrolled through information that didn't care about opinions or impressions. "Do you have the manifest in front of you, Ms. Reed?" the voice asked. "Yes," Vanessa said, a fraction too quickly. "Read the name again." Vanessa hesitated. Elijah felt his heartbeat thud once, hard. "Elijah Brooks," Vanessa said, slower this time. "And his status," the voice pressed. Vanessa swallowed. The sound carried. "He's a passenger," she said. Another pause. "That's not what I asked." The cabin was completely silent now. No laughter, no clinking glasses. Even the passengers who had been pretending not to listen were still. Elijah opened his eyes. The voice returned, clearer now, more deliberate. "Elijah Brooks is a registered principal beneficiary of the Brooks Family Foundation. He is listed as a protected passenger on this flight. Any relocation involving him requires owner-level authorization." The words rolled through the cabin like a slow wave. Vanessa's face drained of color. I wasn't informed of that," she said. "That's correct," the voice replied. "You weren't meant to be." Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me?" "This flight is part of a compliance review," the voice continued evenly. "Behavioral observation. Cultural assessment." Elijah felt a strange sensation then. Not triumph, not relief, but something quieter. Recognition. The voice went on. "We've been monitoring the situation since boarding." Vanessa took a step back, as if the floor beneath her had shifted. "You're saying this was intentional?" she asked. "I'm saying," the voice replied, "that every decision made in the last 40 minutes was recorded." Elijah's breathing slowed even more. His chest still ached, but the tightness had loosened just enough for him to feel the space around it. The curtain rustled. Vanessa turned toward it slowly, like she was seeing it for the first time. The place she had hidden him, the space she thought didn't matter. "Open the curtain," the voice instructed. Vanessa didn't move. "Now." Her hand trembled as she reached up and pulled the fabric aside. Light flooded the galley. Elijah sat exactly where she'd left him, back straight, hands folded, eyes lifted, not defiant, not scared, just present. For the first time since boarding, people saw him clearly. Not as a problem, not as a mistake, as a person. "Elijah Brooks," the voice said through the speaker, softer now. "Are you okay?" Elijah swallowed. "Yes," he answered quietly. "I am." It wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. And in that moment, with his name still hanging in the air and the system finally speaking out loud, Elijah understood something with absolute clarity. He had never been invisible. They had just chosen not to see him. Until now. No one spoke for several seconds after the curtain opened. It wasn't the dramatic silence you hear in movies, where everyone gasps or turns at once. It was heavier than that. The kind of quiet that settles when people realize the rules they thought protected them no longer apply. Elijah stayed seated. He didn't straighten his hoodie or adjust his backpack. He didn't look around to see who was staring. He kept his hands folded in his lap the way he always had, his fingers still slightly tense, like they hadn't yet received permission to relax. Vanessa stood frozen in the aisle. Up close, the confidence that had carried her through the flight looked thinner. Her shoulders were rigid. Her smile was gone completely now, replaced by something closer to disbelief. "This has to be a mistake," she said finally. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried anyway. The voice on the line answered without hesitation. "There's no mistake," it said. "The documentation is clear." Vanessa shook her head once, a sharp, reflexive motion. "He's a child." "Yes," the voice replied. "And that fact makes this situation worse, not better." A murmur rippled through the cabin, low, uneasy. Elijah felt it wash past him like a change in pressure. He didn't look at anyone. He focused instead on the sound of the voice, calm, controlled, steady, the same tone people used when reading facts that didn't care how anyone felt about them. "Elijah Brooks is the named beneficiary and authorized signatory of the Brooks Family Foundation," the voice continued. "The foundation holds a controlling interest in the parent company that owns this aircraft." Vanessa's breath caught audibly. "That's impossible," she said. "No," the voice corrected. "It's documented." Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. He'd heard these words before, in conference rooms, in offices that smelled like coffee and paper, always spoken slowly, as if to make sure he understood. He'd never imagined hearing them here. "In addition," the voice went on, "this flight was designated as a live compliance review. No identifiers were to be disclosed. Crew behavior was to be observed under standard operating conditions." Vanessa turned fully toward Elijah now. "You knew," she said, her voice tight. "You knew the whole time." Elijah opened his eyes and met her gaze. "I wasn't allowed to say anything," he said quietly. The simplicity of it landed harder than any accusation. Vanessa looked away first. "So this was a test," she muttered. "A setup," the voice responded immediately. "No," it said. "It was an opportunity." Elijah felt his chest rise and fall more easily now. The ache was still there, but it no longer felt like it was closing in on him. He noticed distantly that someone had retrieved his inhaler from the floor and placed it gently on the counter beside him. No one announced it. No one made a show of it. It was just returned. "Elijah," the voice said again, softer now. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." Vanessa stiffened. "You're rewarding this," she snapped. "He caused disruption." Elijah flinched at the word, but the voice didn't waver. "He followed instructions," it said. "He remained seated when told. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't disclose protected information. He endured treatment no passenger, especially a minor, should have been subjected to." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed again. "He was never supposed to be moved," the voice continued. "The seat he occupied was not symbolic. It was contractual." A few heads in the cabin lifted. "Elijah's assigned seat is designated as the Foundation's dignity seat," the voice explained. "Any forced relocation constitutes a breach of policy." Vanessa stared straight ahead now, as if the aisle had suddenly become very long. "So what happens now?" she asked. Elijah felt the question hang there, heavy with fear. The voice answered calmly. "Now," it said, "we document everything that's occurred, and we correct it." There was no anger in the words, no threat, just certainty. "Elijah Brooks will be returned to his assigned seat," the voice continued. "A different crew member will assist him. Ms. Reed, you are to step away from passenger-facing duties immediately." Vanessa's face flushed. "You can't be serious." "I am," the voice said. Elijah stood slowly, legs stiff from the jump seat. A different flight attendant, someone he hadn't spoken to before, stepped forward and knelt in front of him, lowering herself to his eye level. "I've got you," she said softly. "Take your time." Elijah nodded. As he stepped into the aisle, people moved without being told. They shifted, creating space. No one touched him. No one rushed him. For the first time on the flight, Elijah felt the weight lift, not because of who he was on paper, but because the truth was finally being allowed to finish its sentence. He walked back toward the front of the cabin, past the seat he'd been forced to leave, past the eyes that had once looked through him. And this time, no one asked him to move. Vanessa Reed stood exactly where she was told to, not because she wanted to, because she no longer had a choice. The cabin had shifted again, but this time it wasn't subtle. The air felt colder, sharper, like a room after someone has opened a window and let reality rush in. Conversations didn't resume. No one reached for their drinks. People watched, quietly now, carefully, as if they were afraid to breathe the wrong way. The voice on the line spoke again, slower, more deliberate. "Ms. Reed," it said, "we're going to review your actions, step by step." Vanessa folded her arms, a defensive reflex. "I followed protocol." There was no immediate response. Instead, a soft click echoed through the cabin. A screen near the galley lit up. Elijah noticed it before anyone else did. Footage appeared, grainy but clear enough. The angle was slightly above eye level, the kind you stop noticing after a while. Cabin cameras. Vanessa's voice, recorded earlier, played through the speakers. "This seating change was necessary, for safety, and for the comfort of our guests." Elijah's stomach tightened as he watched himself on the screen. Small, hesitant, standing beside his seat while Vanessa blocked his path. He hadn't realized how young he looked until now. Vanessa's face drained of color. The video continued. Another angle. Her hand reaching toward Elijah's pocket. The inhaler slipping, bouncing once, sliding out of reach. Vanessa inhaled sharply. "That was an accident." The voice on the line didn't respond. The footage jumped forward. Vanessa standing in the aisle, smiling at passengers. "He's fine, just a bit confused." A murmur spread through the cabin. Not outrage. Not yet. Recognition. Elijah kept his eyes on the floor, but he could feel the attention shifting. Not toward him. Away from him. Away from the idea that he had been the problem. "Next clip," the voice said calmly. The screen changed again. This time it showed the galley, the jump seat, the curtain being pulled shut. Vanessa's recorded voice cut through. "If you unbuckle without permission, that's a violation. I don't want to escalate this into a report." Vanessa shook her head slowly. "You're taking that out of context." "Context," the voice replied, "is exactly what we're reviewing." Another clip. Vanessa speaking to another crew member, her voice low but clear. "I don't care what the manifest says. Use your head. Look at him." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elijah felt something shift inside his chest. Not pain this time. Not fear. Distance. He wasn't inside the moment anymore. He was watching it from the outside, like everyone else. Vanessa's arms dropped to her sides. "That's not—" she started. The voice cut in, still calm, still controlled. "Ms. Reed, at no point did you verify passenger documentation. At no point did you request medical assistance after displacing a minor with a known condition. At multiple points, you referenced image and presentation as justification for your actions. The screen went dark. Silence followed. Vanessa looked around, searching for something. Support, outrage, an ally. She found none. A man near the window leaned back slowly, shaking his head. A woman across the aisle pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on the floor. Elijah felt the weight of it then. Not triumph, not revenge. Accountability. "So, what now?" Vanessa asked, her voice smaller than before. The voice on the line answered without hesitation. "You are being removed from active duty, effective immediately." Vanessa's breath hitched. "You can't. You will surrender your credentials upon landing," the voice continued. "A full review will be forwarded to regulatory authorities. Based on the evidence, further action is likely." Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. For the first time since boarding, she had nothing left to say. "Elijah Brooks," the voice said, shifting tone again, gentler now. "You're not required to remain present for this conversation." Elijah looked up. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I can stay." The words surprised even him. The voice paused. "Are you sure?" Elijah nodded once. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He just wanted it finished. Vanessa turned toward him, her eyes glassy. "I didn't know," she said. "If I had known." Elijah met her gaze, steady and calm. "But you didn't check," he said. It wasn't accusation. It was fact. Vanessa looked away. The voice on the line spoke one final time. "This concludes the review." The call disconnected. The cabin remained still. Elijah exhaled slowly. The system had spoken. And for the first time since this flight began, the truth didn't need him to carry it anymore. The plane felt different after that. Not quieter, though it was, but calmer in a way Elijah had never experienced before. Like a room after someone finally turns off a buzzing light you didn't realize was giving you a headache the whole time. The other flight attendant, her name tag read Mara, walked beside Elijah as they moved back toward the front of the cabin. She didn't rush him. She didn't touch his shoulder without asking. She simply stayed close enough that he didn't feel alone. "Take your time," she said softly. Elijah nodded and stepped forward, his legs still stiff from the jump seat. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not from fear now, but from the strange exhaustion that comes after holding yourself together for too long. People moved out of the way as he passed. Not dramatically. No apologies shouted across the aisle. Just quiet shifts. Knees pulling back, bags moved aside, eyes lowering in something that looked a lot like respect. When they reached his seat, Elijah stopped. For a second, he didn't move. It was the same seat. Same cream leather, same wide armrests, same soft light pooling across it like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Mara noticed his hesitation and knelt beside him, bringing herself down to his level. "You don't have to sit here if you don't want to," she said gently. "We can find somewhere else, wherever you're comfortable." Elijah looked at her, surprised. No one had asked him that before. He glanced at the seat again. His chest tightened. Not with fear, but with memory. The way Vanessa's hand had blocked him. The way his feet had dragged when he stood up. The sound of the curtain closing. Then he did something small, but important. He took a breath. "I want to sit here," he said. Mara nodded. "Okay." Elijah climbed into the seat carefully, like he had the first time. But this time, his hand didn't shake. He placed his backpack at his feet again, adjusted the strap on his hoodie, and leaned back. The leather was warm now. Someone had retrieved his inhaler and placed it neatly on the side table beside him. Elijah noticed it immediately. He picked it up, checked the cap, and set it back down where he could see it. Just knowing it was there made it easier to breathe. Mara smiled softly. "If you need anything at all, you let me know. I'll be right up here." "Thank you," Elijah said. She hesitated, then added, "I'm really sorry." Elijah nodded once. He didn't know what to say to that, but somehow it was enough. As Mara walked away, the cabin slowly began to exhale. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. A man reached for his glass again, though he didn't drink. A woman across the aisle glanced at Elijah, then looked away, her expression thoughtful. No one stared. That mattered more than applause ever could have. Elijah rested his hands on the armrests, feeling the steady vibration of the plane beneath him. Outside the window, clouds drifted past in thick white layers, endless and soft. For the first time since boarding, he let his shoulders drop. He hadn't realized how high they'd been held. His mind drifted, unbidden, to the jump seat, to the cold wall, to the metal cabinet and the inhaler just out of reach, to how small he'd felt sitting there, listening to laughter on the other side of a curtain. He didn't feel angry about it now. He felt finished, as if that part of the story had reached its natural end. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was steady again, professional, but there was something different beneath it now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be continuing our flight as scheduled. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask our crew. There was no explanation. There didn't need to be. Elijah looked down at his backpack and reached inside, pulling out the folder at last. He placed it on the table in front of him but didn't open it, just rested his hand on top of it, feeling the weight. It no longer felt sharp. It felt like responsibility. He thought about what the voice on the line had said earlier, about documentation, about correction, about how the system worked when it was allowed to. This wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring something that should never have been taken in the first place. A sense of safety. A sense of dignity. Mara returned a few minutes later with a glass of water and a small snack, setting them down quietly. "Just in case," she said. Elijah smiled faintly. "Thanks." He took a sip of water, cool and grounding, and leaned back into the seat. The engine hum was smoother up here, less aggressive. The light softer. Outside, the plane cut through the sky with calm certainty. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. For the first time on this flight, he didn't feel like he was bracing for the next thing to go wrong. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for now, that was enough. The correction didn't arrive with flashing lights or raised voices. It came quietly. Elijah noticed it first in the way the crew moved. There was no rush anymore. No sharp glances toward the front of the cabin. No whispered conversations cut short when someone walked by. The tension that had filled the plane earlier, tight, brittle, ready to snap, had dissolved into something steadier, professional. Mara passed through the aisle again, checking on passengers with an ease that felt genuine now, not forced. When she reached Elijah's row, she didn't stop to hover or apologize again. She simply nodded, the way adults do when they recognize someone as an equal in the moment. "You doing okay?" she asked. Elijah nodded back. "Yes." She smiled and moved on. Behind the scenes, things were already shifting. Elijah didn't hear the details right away, but he felt them. The way the cockpit door opened and closed more often than usual. The way a tablet was handed from one crew member to another. The way voices dropped into serious, measured tones. Not panicked, not defensive. Corrective tones. A few rows back, a man leaned toward his seatmate and whispered, "They're documenting everything." His seatmate nodded. About time. Elijah looked out the window, watching the clouds slide past in slow, endless waves. He thought about how strange it was that something so big could change without anyone making a scene. That was the thing about real power, he was learning. It didn't need to announce itself. A short while later, the intercom chimed again. Not the urgent tone from earlier. This one was softer, deliberate. "Cabin crew, please check your tablets," the captain said. Mara paused mid-step, glanced down, and read. Her expression shifted, not with shock, but with resolve. Elijah couldn't see what was on the screen, but he didn't need to. He knew. This was the part they had explained to him in advance. Not in detail, but in principle. Correction had to be visible, not dramatic, visible. A new protocol was being issued. Effective immediately. Elijah recognized the language when Mara passed again and set her tablet down on the counter near the galley. Mandatory dignity safeguards for all passengers. Enhanced protections for minors. Zero tolerance for discretionary seating changes based on appearance. Immediate escalation required for any medical accommodation. Elijah read the words upside down, slowly. They weren't written for him. They were written because of him. Vanessa Reed remained out of sight. No announcement was made about her removal. No one pointed. No one whispered her name anymore. It was as if the system had quietly closed a door and moved forward without her. That, Elijah realized, was the real consequence. Not embarrassment. Replacement. Mara returned once more, holding a small document folder. "Hey," she said softly. "This came through for you." Elijah looked at it, then back up at her. "What is it?" "Confirmation," she replied. "That everything we talked about earlier is being implemented. Training, oversight, review." Elijah took the folder but didn't open it yet. "Do I need to sign anything?" he asked. Mara shook her head. "Not right now. This part doesn't fall on you." That mattered. For once, the burden wasn't his to carry. Across the aisle, the woman who had earlier asked if he was okay leaned over slightly. "I just wanted to say," she began, then stopped, choosing her words carefully. "You handled yourself with a lot of grace." Elijah met her eyes. "Thank you." She nodded and sat back. The rest of the flight passed differently than it had begun. Not lighter, truer. People spoke with more care. Crew members double-checked instead of assuming. Questions were asked instead of brushed aside. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And better, Elijah knew, was how change actually happened. As the plane continued on through the sky, Elijah rested his hand on the armrest and felt the steady rhythm of motion beneath him. He thought about the jump seat again. Not with pain this time, but with clarity. That moment had mattered, not because it had hurt him, but because it had revealed something that needed fixing. He glanced at his backpack, at the folder inside, at the responsibility he carried quietly, and would continue to carry long after this flight ended. The system had failed him. But then, something rare had happened. It had listened, and now it was correcting itself. That was the lesson. Not that power punishes, but that dignity, when defended properly, reshapes the rules for everyone who comes after. The plane began its descent without drama. There was no sudden drop, no sharp turn, just a gentle tilt, the kind that nudges your body forward and reminds you that every journey, no matter how turbulent, eventually moves toward an end. Elijah felt it and opened his eyes. Outside the window, the clouds thinned, revealing a patchwork of land far below. He watched it quietly, one hand resting on the armrest, the other on his backpack. His breathing was steady now, easy. The tightness that had followed him since boarding had loosened its grip, leaving behind only a faint ache, like a bruise that was already healing. Mara passed by one last time, pausing just long enough to meet his eyes. "We'll be landing soon," she said. "Take your time getting ready." Elijah nodded. "Okay." She smiled and moved on. Across the cabin, passengers gathered their things more slowly than usual. No one rushed. No one crowded the aisle. There was a shared understanding now, unspoken but present, that something important had happened on this flight, and that it wasn't meant to be cheapened by haste. Elijah reached into his backpack and pulled out the folder again. This time, he opened it. The pages inside were exactly as he remembered. Formal language, signatures, seals, the kind of paperwork that carried weight far beyond its thin paper. He scanned the page marked with a small tab and found the line he'd been told to look for. Authorization confirmed. He picked up the pen clipped to the folder and held it for a moment, feeling its smooth weight between his fingers. No one was watching him now. That mattered too. Elijah signed. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, no flourish, just his name, written carefully, the way he'd practiced. The decision he was confirming would release funding to children's hospitals across 3 states, support programs that didn't care what kids wore, where they sat, or how quietly they spoke. He closed the folder and slid it back into his bag. The seatbelt sign chimed softly. As the plane touched down, the wheels met the runway with a controlled thud. The cabin shifted, slowed, and then rolled forward, steady and sure. Elijah felt the familiar jolt in his body, but this time it didn't unsettle him. It grounded him. When the plane finally came to a stop, the cabin filled with the quiet sounds of arrival. Zippers, seatbelts, murmured conversations. People stood, then paused, waiting their turn. Elijah stayed seated a moment longer. He looked around the cabin one last time. At the seats, the aisle, the space that had once felt hostile and now felt neutral. Safe. He didn't feel victorious, he felt balanced. When it was his turn, he stood and stepped into the aisle. No one blocked him. No one gestured him aside. He walked forward at his own pace, backpack slung over one shoulder, head held level. At the door, he paused and glanced back once. Not to look for Vanessa, not to look for validation, just to take it in. Then he stepped off the plane. Later, as the jet sat quiet on the tarmac and the crew began preparing it for its next flight, a new set of rules remained in place. New training, new standards, new expectations. They wouldn't remember Elijah's hoodie. They wouldn't remember his seat number, but they would remember what happened when they stopped making assumptions and started paying attention. And somewhere in the quiet between flights, the system adjusted itself. Not out of fear, but out of dignity.